Good evening, noswaith dda, and welcome to Menopause and how exercise can help. Good evening and welcome. Every time I use this, I always get really flummoxed at the beginning because it goes live and then it changes the screen. So welcome to everybody. My name's Rachel Hubbard, and I would say I'm a menopause expert in terms of how health and fitness can improve your menopause journey, and really about how menopause influences your health and fitness, and explain to you maybe some of the reasons why you're having all of these symptoms from a physical point of view, and to think about maybe ways that you can do it in different ways and ways that help. Um, I've been trying to set up this video to go live for the past 5 minutes now. So if you are on the screen and you have done a talk with me before, if you can just say hello or put your thumb up or anything like that, that all helps then to wake up the Facebook page for everybody else. I'm going to start recording this this talk now, and it will be on the website for over a month. So if you want to listen to it again, please do so. The work that I've done on menopause started way back in 2009. So really before I think menopause became like a real thing or a real interest. And I was a personal trainer and a class tutor. And I had a lot of women come up to me going, Rachel, the menopause, it's terrible. Can you help me? And there were a couple of things that people complained about in particular. And one of them was putting on weight, especially around their belly. Hi, Andrea, how are you? Okay, cool, we can all listen. And the other thing was like the feeling of tiredness and the hot flushes. And so I did my dissertation based around how do you motivate yourself to exercise? Because at the time, bear in mind I was about 45 at the time, I was in that positive mindset that this was an opening, a new era in your life where all of a sudden your kids have left home, you have a little bit more spare time on your hands, you have a little bit more money, and you can invest that into personal training and going to the gym. Little did I know how traumatic the menopause can be. And it's almost like I always think, like, when people tell you about having a baby, and having a baby is a different experience for anybody else, but until you've been through it, you've got no idea of all the little things that happen. And if you've never been through it, you can kind of guess. And I think it's the same with menopause. So that was 2009. Come 2015, so this is now 6 years later, I think I was starting to be perimenopausal. So I started to notice changes, and when my periods were happening, they would get more heavy. I didn't really notice massive changes. I had a little bit of hot flushes, but when you exercise a lot, a hot flush can sometimes feel like you're having a workout, except, you're sitting in your chair. But then I had a cyst. I had an ovarian cyst. And it grew. And I can remember going to a Les Mills all day workout thing, thinking like, I'm sure I'll be fine, I'll be fine, I'll be fine. Came back the next day and it burst in my class. But then I had cancer in that cyst. Now I caught it early, so there were no signs and symptoms. But it did mean I lost both my ovaries within a month of the cyst bursting. And I went into a rapid menopause. And all of a sudden, all the things that I took for granted as a fitness instructor, the ability to teach 10, 14 classes a week without, batting an eyelid, to have a hard class, to look after the kids and do everything else, my world came crashing down. It set off. I had underactive thyroid, I had migraines, I had bloating, I just didn't know what to do with myself. I thought literally that I was going mad. And then that's when I started to think about, maybe I need to revisit my dissertation. So over the years, I've revisited my dissertation, and then during lockdown, when there was no exercise to do, I really got into having a look at some of the research around that. And what I found was quite shocking. Most of my life, I've either been a fitness instructor or I've been a tutor to teach people about how to become a fitness instructor, not only on like a general level of teaching a class, but more specialist personal trainers. So I've taught nutrition, I've taught what's called GP referral or the National Exercise Scheme, I've taught back care. Never once did we talk about menopause. And so there was very little information out there about how does fitness change and how does fitness influence menopause. And I think it's become a far more interesting subject of late, because there has been such a change in the way that menopause is viewed and the way menopause is seen by people, and that people are now recognising women are going through the menopause. It's no longer so much, a joke, oh, she's having a hot flush. It's more about what is the impact on health. And I think you've got some amazing commentators out there about how your own health influences your menopausal journey, but how you can influence your menopausal journey by considering some of the health issues that you may not know about. We often think about the menopause being in that perimenopausal phase. So if you think about when you're younger and you're having your period, that week leading up to your period is when estrogen starts to drop. And we get all the things. We get grumpy, we get spots, we crave sugar, we're irritable, and then we have a period and we go, oh yeah, that's what it was, blah, 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 off I go again. What happens in the perimenopausal phase is you have that PMT phase every day for like 6 years. And every day you get more and more grouchy, and you get a little bit more anxious, and you can't sleep. And then all these different kinds of things are happening. And quite often women go to the doctor at that point. And quite often they're misdiagnosed. They've told they've got fibromyalgia, they've got depression, they've got early onset dementia, and they're treated medically for a condition or an illness when in fact it could well be menopause. They think that you need to have around 10 to 15 symptoms available for your doctors to kind of think like, oh yeah, maybe you have got the menopause, especially if you're not within the kind of age bracket that is defined. So going back to my story, once lockdown came and I was just struggling because I'd spent all of my life teaching classes and I didn't have anything to do, I started to look into menopause in a little bit more way. And I wrote a course, okay? So I wrote a course for fitness instructors saying, listen, did you know that when you're doing personal training with your client, the reason why they are finding it hard to lose weight is not because they're cheating on the weekend or not doing the workouts you're saying to them. It's actually because menopausal women cannot access the fat stores in the same way they could before the menopause. Now, once I started to realise, hang on, this is like basic information. So when you're active and you're young, your fat stores are there, you burn fat. When you're menopausal, you can do the same exercise. Okay, so if you run marathons, you can do marathons, you will still put on weight. You can cut down calories, you will still put on weight. Not for everybody, but definitely for people who have really dropped their estrogen. And estrogen is this key hormone for us that we see influences. So if you think of somebody like me who had their ovaries removed, that estrogen drop was quick. If you go through a natural menopause, you can be 80 before that happens. If you're on the pill or on the coil, you're not going to notice it because you're already having estrogen with your pill and your coil. If you have had, I don't know, some kind of hormonal treatment to help with your perimenopause, you're not going to notice it the same. And everybody's different. But I bet you, when I read out some of these things, you can go, oh yeah, that's me. And you might not realise everything. I ummed and ahed about doing this as a PowerPoint, but I just think sometimes you can watch a PowerPoint and you get bored halfway through. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit more. And hopefully you can ask some questions. So you see people saying hello in the comments down there. So if you have a question, then you can, there's estrogen in the coil, estrogen and progesterone in the coil. So if you've got any kind of contraceptive, you're going to have an easier menopausal journey. That doesn't mean you don't have the menopause. So let's define what menopause is. Okay, so menopause is when your ovaries die. So as we get older, you enter the age where you're no longer fertile, okay? You don't really want to be having a baby when you're 50. So nature has decided that your ovaries will stop producing eggs from your late 40s, and by your 60s, they probably have more or less shut down. So you don't have periods. So one of the kind of key things that they say where you've gone through the perimenopause and you're in the menopause is that you haven't had a period for 12 months. So what you find, yeah, if you get progesterone in your coil, yeah, that will still help you with HRT. So there's quite a lot of new research about. So even when I wrote the course 3 years ago now, we were saying like you can have estrogen or estrogen and progesterone HRT, and it would be dependent upon whether you had a womb. And you would only have the progesterone if you had a womb, because they wouldn't give it to you otherwise, because they'd say the progesterone is there because progesterone governs your periods. You wouldn't be given the progesterone because you had no womb from having hysterectomy. But what they're now saying is that actually progesterone offers an amazing protective influence on a woman's health, and that we should all be having estrogen, progesterone and testosterone in order to enable us to live a longer, happier, healthier life. So we don't want to live a longer life feeling old and miserable and aching and not being able to sleep and feeling grumpy. We want to live that longer time being happy and healthy and active. You think now, right? So I'm 60 now. I could probably live another 20 years. So I might live a long time, maybe longer than I was fertile in a menopausal phase. I want to make sure that I'm at optimum health. Okay, hang on. I'm looking at the question. Can you tell I'm losing my eyesight? Here we go. Yeah. Yes, definitely, Debs. You're definitely in the perimenopause. So perimenopause is when we see disturbance in your menstrual cycle. So sometimes you kind of go 4 weeks, sometimes you go 6 weeks, sometimes you go 3 months, and then you'll have the mother of all periods. And then one time you'll kind of go like, oh, it's been a year. And quite often I find quite a few of my friends will have 11 months with no period, then they'll have one last period, and they've got to wait another 12 months before they considered to be in the menopause. But most of the difficult symptoms come in the perimenopause, okay? So the things like hot flushes, not being able to sleep, night sweats, itchy skin, tinnitus, dry mouth. There are 30 recognised symptoms. I mean, you can go and Google the list if you want to. I mean, I could read it out to you if you want, but you know, it takes forever to read out. Once you've gone through the menopause, that means your periods have stopped, but your estrogen still might be declining slowly. Okay, so it's not sufficient to keep menstruating, you know, you're not ovulating at all. And it is the effect of not having estrogen on your body that is detrimental to our health. And what I'm saying to you here is, how do we offset not having estrogen in order to allow ourselves to live happier, longer, healthier lives? Because we know we don't have ovaries, and not everybody is going to be able to take HRT. And quite often, sometimes doctors will only give you HRT for the perimenopause. So once you then come to the menopause, you've still got no estrogen, and you'll go through all the changes and you'll have all the side effects and the symptoms. So there are key areas that women come to talk to me about. Because I am a woman, I get a lot of women in my class, and I get a lot of women ask me questions. Number one symptom that I think most women complain about are the hot flushes or not being able to sleep. And this is all to do with the brain function. And I did a post earlier, but have you ever walked in a room and gone like, don't know why I'm here? Or you can't remember somebody's name and you know them. Or the thing I found is I love cooking, you know, and I cook often, so I can remember recipes without having to look at recipe book. Could I remember recipes? I was like, I can't remember how to make this cake, or I can't remember how to make bread, and I'd have to check the recipe time and time again. Or you know, when you get that little PIN number and you've got to type it in, you can't remember it, or you can't remember your password. My father has dementia. My grandmother had dementia. So for me, the menopause and brain health was really key. The second thing that women to come and talk to me about is pelvic floor issues. Because the minute you start having your menopause, yeah, Karisu, yeah. If you're a Marina, then it's progesterone only. Okay. Yes, Debs, you should be worried about your bone health. I'm going to come to bone health in a minute. So let's look at pelvic floor issues quickly. So what you find with when you go through the menopause, we have these different kinds of incontinence that affect us. So we'll have things like stress incontinence. So when you cough, laugh, sneeze, jump, you have a little bit of a, and I use this bottle. If you think this is your bladder, you have a little bit of a, and it spills over. Then you have that urge incontinence where you're okay until you see the door to the toilet, and then you cannot get your kit off in time to sit down on the loo. And that is a nervous response where the muscle that squeezes the bladder to empty it starts before you're ready. Then you can have a dribble incontinence where, like, the leaky bit where it comes out doesn't close properly. And this is because estrogen affects the tension of our muscles. So when we look at what's called epithelial cells, or the smooth cells, estrogen keeps those healthy. And when our estrogen diminishes, you know, if your face is a little bit saggy, then your inside bits are a little bit saggy as well, and it doesn't close properly. And then you can get the other side where you have a hypertonic floor. And that is usually because maybe you've had some kind of operation, maybe you had a difficult birth, maybe you had a tear, maybe you had an episiotomy, maybe you had a prolapse, maybe you had a cystocele or rectocele, and you have scar tissue that causes the muscle to be tense, that makes it impossible to do the evacuation process that we need to allow the pelvic floor to relax. But you still may have either urge or stress incontinence as well. And that's where it becomes difficult, because the minute I start talking about Pilates and pelvic floor, the amount of women who come to talk to me is unbelievable. And I just think, like, nobody tells you. When I had my hysterectomy, nobody tells you this is going to affect your health. Okay, the third thing that people come to me is about the increase in belly fat. But what we fail to see, what we fail to recognise, but if you read Louise Newson, she's really trying to press this now about the way that increased belly fat is an indicator for increased heart disease, and that women store more belly fat. Even if you are skinny, you store more belly fat after menopause because of the way that estrogen influences the distribution of our fat cells. So we change shape. I've never had a fat belly in my life. I've had 4 kids, C-section. I can show you a photo of me at 51, stomach like a washboard. Not a problem. You get to menopause and you start to get more rounded belly. You could sometimes think like, well, it's lack of muscle mass, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just increased intra-abdominal fat. Okay. Yeah, leaky. Louise Newson. Yeah, go and get Louise Newson. She's got a great book out. And then finally, I think it is osteoporosis. Now, to me, osteoporosis is a kind of thing like we kind of go, oh yeah, you've got menopause and you've got this, and then you've got osteoporosis, without realising the influence that estrogen has on us getting osteoporosis. So what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to be reading some facts and figures, and then we'll have a little chat. But please, if I'm saying something, put something in the comments. I'll come back and answer it. And if you want to private message me, do that as well. All right, give me a second. I'm going to get to the right page. Okay. So we know that currently there are around 13 million women in the UK who are going through the menopause. That is currently at 51% of the UK population. It's a huge number of women, and I think that's why it's become a little bit more, out there, because it is all about why are we, not doing this? Why are we, suffering in silence? And I think what's interesting is that when we look at life expectancy for women, if we go to the turn of the century, so like in the 1900s, most women would have died by the age of 50. So we wouldn't have known much about their menopause. Come to the 1950s, we're living into our 60s. So you might have been through the perimenopause, you might have been through the menopause, but you're still not at that, 70-year-old phase where your health is really affected. These days, we're living to be 83. But listen, We don't retire. I can't retire. I can't get my pension for another 5 years. My mum had already been retired for 2 years by the time she was my age. And so women are staying in the workplace for much longer. And I think that's why workplaces are suddenly having to do something. They think around 900,000 women leave their job because of menopause. And it's usually to do with the brain fog, where they feel like they've lost confidence in themselves, they don't know what's happening to them, they can't sleep, they're tired, they can't remember things. And I think it's quite an interesting way that we're now changing our viewpoint on menopause. They think that 1 in 10 women do not know that they have the menopause at all. And I think this is often in the younger side of perimenopause, where you don't recognise the symptoms. You just think you're going a bit bonkers. You know, your perimenopause can start anywhere from your late 30s or younger. So say, like, for example, you've had breast cancer and you've had chemotherapy. The chemotherapy can, in some cases, destroy the ovaries, and so you start then having menopausal symptoms after your breast cancer surgery. And sometimes you think, well, actually, you know, I feel rubbish because of the breast cancer and the way I'm recovering, but it could be because of the menopause. We know about 1 in 4 of us will have hardly any symptoms. These are usually people who have maybe stayed on the pill, stayed on the coil, maybe have had a natural menopause, maybe have been very active when they were younger, so they had a great reserve of health and fitness to see them through. 3 in 4, however, will experience some symptoms. So that's 3/4 of the people experience some symptoms, and 1 in 4 have such bad symptoms it really affects their life. Now, for me, the key things for me that were really noticeable that still are with me is can't eat meat because it gives me migraine. So I've never had a migraine before, and I've always been a carnivore. So it's been a really weird kind of thing for me, and it's been a big learning process not to be able to eat meat. 30% of women who were not on HRT were more likely to stop working. 10% of women in 2027, this is not recent, lost their jobs because of the amount of time they took off for sickness due to menopausal symptoms. 60% of women report that tiredness is one of the highest issues that stops them working effectively. This fact that really shocked me is that women aged 45 to 54, perimenopausal age, have the highest female suicide rate. It is more than double that of teenagers, and it's in contrast to male suicides. So women are going into the suicide stage of not being able to deal with their menopause symptoms. These kind of facts really made me think about, well, there must be something we can do. You know, we can't just keep kind of going like, oh yeah, you know, menopause is natural, get on with it. Why is it that we don't know anything about it? Why is it that we're not taught enough in schools from an early age about menopause? So let's have a look at some of the ways that exercise really makes a difference to our body. And I'm going to start with that brain function, because I think it's the one where people get really frustrated, where, you know, they're looking to why is something not working? Why does estrogen, which is a reproductive hormone, affect my brain so much? But estrogen influences brain function through what is known as the vascular system. So if you think about the transportation of blood around the body, anything like that is that we find that estrogen influences that. So it keeps the arteries open, it keeps everything flowing freely. We talked about those epithelial cells, keeps the cells healthy, keeps, you know, everything functioning. So cognitive complaints are more common in postmenopausal women. So we get all this raft of kind of things happening in the perimenopause between those ages of 40, 45 and 54. Most women have finished their menopause by 51 as an average. Some women are 60, okay? Some women are 30. So the cognitive function that gets affected looks at memory and learning, problem solving, decision making, attention to detail, focus, reasoning, and remembering. So when our brain function gets affected by estrogen, we can't think straight. So our problem solving suddenly becomes more challenging. Sometimes it's to do with a hot flush. So when we have a hot flush, what happens is the estrogen is not controlling our body, our brain, to say that we're too hot or too cold. We suddenly have this hot flush, and what happens is the body diverts. So if you think like in the central part of your body, you hold 80% of your blood in this area when you're resting or sitting down at work. Says, I'm too hot. Okay, so it's a thermogenic effect. Your brain goes like, I'm too hot, I need to cool down. So what you do when you want to cool down, you get a red face. So if you've been out in the sun, or you've been in the sauna, get red face, red arms and legs, because it brings all the blood to the surface of the skin to allow you to cool down. So if you've ever had a hot flush, you feel on fire, and it diverts so much blood that they actually think that it reduces the amount of oxygen flowing in your brain. You'll then get so hot, your brain goes, I need to cool down. So what do we do when we want to cool down? We sweat. Yeah, so if it's a really hot day, we start sweating. If you have an extreme heat in your body caused by all this blood coming to your surface, because your brain thinks you're getting too hot, you then have this extreme sweating afterwards. And then your body kind of goes, okay, I've cooled down now. And then it can happen again. You know, sometimes you can have 1 a day, 10 a day. Sometimes, you know, it can be different times. It can be when you're stressed and when you're anxious. And when you're getting hot, you will literally want to take your clothes off because it is so difficult. Now, some of the things they find with exercise, remember I said it felt like a workout. The people who exercise regularly have a more efficient transportation for blood to move around the body, and therefore they have a less severe hot flush and a quicker recovery, simply because the vascular system is more efficient. I find this really, really, really fascinating. Oh yeah. Yet I will come back to the questions on HRT. I'm not a doctor, remember. I have read a lot, but I can tell you why HRT doesn't work all the time. So this cognitive function, where we have this problem solving, can be because A, we're tired because we haven't slept, and B, because we're having the hot flushes. But this attention to task is all to do with the hippocampus part of the brain that is nurtured when we eat well, sleep well, and exercise. When we don't do those things, our hippocampus volume decreases. Alzheimer's and dementia are now considered to be a female orientated illness. If you ever go into any kind of nursing home, there'll be far more women with dementia than men. It's not saying men don't get it, but women are more prone to it, and it's because estrogen stops protecting our brain. If you think of where your skull is and your brain sitting inside your head, between your skull and your brain there's a membrane, and surrounding that or in between the membrane and the brain, there's kind of fluid and nerves and everything that happens, and they work. And what they think is what estrogen does is it makes your brain fire quickly. And I liken this to, you know, when you're in an aeroplane and you're flying over and you can see all the towns below and you can see towns lit up, and then when you're going into the countryside there's maybe a few little lights where farmer houses are. That's what happens to your brain when you don't have enough estrogen. So instead of having what is called synaptic and dendritic strength, so it's the messaging to the brain is weaker, and the amount of messaging that is going to the brain is less. So you literally kind of go, I know it's in there somewhere, I know it's in there somewhere, and then 5 minutes later you do get it. It's just like a slow process. It's like slow internet. This part of the brain between this kind of membrane and the brain where the nerve endings help needs to rest. So in the day, we're busy, making decisions, we're doing things. At night, what happens is the fluid changes and it kind of resets your brain, okay? So when you wake up refreshed, that's what's happened. Your brain has had a reset and a refresh, so your next day you're ready to go again. When you're going through the menopause, because estrogen has stopped that happening as effectively, okay, not completely, as effectively, you can sometimes wake up feeling tired, wake up feeling foggy, wake up thinking like, oh my God, I can't remember what I'm doing today. You know, you can't find things, you become clumsy, you hit things, you break things, you put things in the wrong place, you put something down, you can't remember where it is. So allowing your body chance to repair your brain helps everything else. Now, exercise helps you do this. Number one, it's going to make you sleep a little bit better. But number two is it allows your synaptic and dendritic system around the brain to function. Okay, so when we exercise, the brain is stimulated and those nerves help. Food also helps. So nutrition is always your friend in the menopause. And in particular, if you look at gut health, go and read up as much as you can about gut health and about probiotics and prebiotics and the way that the gut communicates to the brain to allow it to recover at night. So when we look at sleep patterns at night, you have like normal sleep and then you have what's called deep sleep. So this recovery for your brain only happens in the deep sleep. Now, if you're going to bed and you've been woken up 2 or 3 times a night and you're having to change your nightgown and change your sheets, you're not going to have sufficient amount of deep sleep in order to be able to recover. Little things that we can do. We want to stimulate what's called melatonin. So melatonin is stimulated when we go outside in sunshine. So if you can, you try and do your exercise outdoors. Then you can eat melatonin by looking at food that include tryptophan. So have a look at tryptophan. So things like, you know, all the normal healthy foods, you know, your broccoli, your kale, all the cruciferous foods, your turkey, eggs, anything that's got high levels of tryptophan, which is protein. So you'll see a lot of people saying like, you need to eat protein in menopause. There's many reasons why you need to up your protein intake, but also you need to take more tryptophan. But the memory part of your body can then be linked to depression, anxiety, and makes you feel that you're less of a person, that you are becoming older because you're becoming more forgetful. And maybe we can remember our aunt or our mother or our grandmother forgetting things and repeating things. You know, 60% of women complain about this. So we know that estrogen starts to diminish before the menopause begins, okay? And then after about 2 years in a natural menopause, okay, not in a surgical or a chemical one, then we see this big reported in, oh, I can't remember, you know, I can't remember things, I'm finding it difficult. So this synaptic plasticity, so how we get the neurons to keep healthy and how we protect hippocampal health, how we manage our stress and reduce cortisol is super key to everything in menopause and beyond. I've got 5 minutes, I've only talked about brain. Okay, so be active, be healthy, and you know, try and improve your sleeping and try and reduce your stress. I'm going to come on to cardiovascular health quickly, and then I'm going to talk about brain health. So when we look at brain health, we know that we get these kind of vasomotor symptoms, the hot flushes, the lack of sleep. When we look at cardiovascular health, we don't see those changes straight away. These changes take years to happen. And so there's not that urgency. You know, you notice when your brain's not working well, but you might not notice your arteries fur up. So let's go back to those epithelial cells in your body. So the epithelial cells are inside smooth muscle, okay? So inside your arteries, inside your heart, inside your gut. those get affected by estrogen. Okay, so they become a little bit more weak. But what happens is that we can't burn fat in the same way. So you can be eating the same amount of food and you will have increased cholesterol, increased blood pressure, increased intra-abdominal fat. Possibly you might be told that you have a fatty liver, or what's called a non-alcoholic fatty liver. And that is because we cannot access our fat stores. If you think about fat, so fat underneath our body, we need it, we use it for things. That is not the same to the fat that is stored in this intra-abdominal cavity. This feels kind of hard, we can't bend forward, we have a more rounded belly, and so we want to be able to access those fat stores to reduce our inflammatory response. Now, high inflammatory response is linked to increase in cancer, increase in coronary heart disease, or what's known as your cardiac metabolic syndrome. So you're more likely to have type 2 diabetes, more likely to have high cholesterol, more likely to have high blood pressure. And cardiovascular disease is the biggest killer in the world. Okay, so the menopause transition, remember, is associated with gains in all fat areas. And postmenopausal women are shown to have a 20% increase in fat mass compared to premenopausal women. So if you're already starting before your menopause in a slightly heavier state, then you really need to think about ways you're going to reduce that. So some of it is related to the greater risk of cardiovascular disease, and easy, it's real basic stuff. We know that moving helps. You don't have to be the best runner in the world, and if you've got weak pelvic floor, you're not going to be the best runner in the world. We know that resistance training has a huge influence on our heart health. So if you think about your heart, you've got 4 chambers in the heart, okay? Your left ventricle is your main chamber to pump the blood out. There's been some amazing research that shows resistance training improves the strength and condition of your left ventricle, which means that you can exercise and have a healthier heart without going for a run. And I think that's really key because, when you've got the menopause, your feet spread, you can't fit in your trainers, your joints ache, your boobs, are like full of water and you can't run because they're bouncing everywhere. You feel wobbly and you're very conscious of your belly, wobbling when you run. So going to the gym and doing exercises or going to a toning class or going to Pilates or going to yoga helps your heart become as strong, and they think it is as effective as walking. Walking is just a key thing, okay? So go for a walk wherever you can. Doesn't matter if it's 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Every bit of walking that you do really helps. Don't worry about how many steps you're doing, okay? If you're in a bad mood, go for a walk. You had a hot flush, go for a walk. Even if you say, I'm just going to the loo, just go outside, walk around, come back in. You will feel much better, I promise you. So there's an amazing study called the Framingham study that looked at like 3,000 women over a 30-year period. And they found that coronary heart disease is 2 to 3-fold greater in menopausal women compared to perimenopausal women. And they couldn't work out what was happening until they looked at the estrogen levels. So we know you can't burn fat the same. We know that you don't burn as much energy when you're exercising. And so weight training becomes your friend because muscle mass demands more calories at rest. And it means that you can, sit down next to somebody who doesn't do any weights and be burning more calories. It's just really, really interesting. I could do a whole thing just on coronary heart disease, couldn't I? Okay, so the other thing with weight training is this improvement in bone health. Now, some of the stats around bone health I find are really quite shocking. And I'm going to read some of them for you because it needs to be said in the correct way. So women lose 10% of their bone mass in the first 5 years after menopause. So when we look at bone structure, it has an outer casing that is hard and solid, doesn't really change that much. We have an inner part of the bone that is formed of like a honeycomb structure. Those little structures weaken when we don't have estrogen. And that's because within the bone cell itself, you have what are called osteoclasts and osteoblasts. So osteoblasts are like stem cells for bones, and they grow new bone mass for us. Brilliant. The osteoclasts are cleaners of any old bone, so that we always have this constant turnover of bone throughout our life. Okay, so bone's a living thing. So if you've ever broken your arm or your hand or something, after it's bigger, okay, and that's because we've increased the bone mass, and then over time it shrinks back down, and that is where the osteoclasts, the cleaners, are tidying up all the old bone mass. The thing that stimulates the bone stem cells is estrogen. So if you're not on HRT, you've had a hysterectomy, you don't have any ovaries, or you've had cancer treatment that's killed your ovaries, doesn't happen in all cases, remember, you stop making bone mass. But the cleaning ones don't stop. They keep cleaning up and cleaning up the old bone, because that's their job. And what they do is they clean the bone to such an extent it becomes weak. And you have then what's called a fragility fracture, which means that you spontaneously break a bone. Could be leaning forward, could be coughing, could be sneezing. One of the most common sites for spontaneous fractures in your back. So we'll get people coming to back hair class complaining of lower back pain. Quite often it's because they've got a spinal fracture, because they've got osteoporosis, because it's known as a silent crippler, because we do not know about it. You only know about it when it's got to that point. But you need to have some red flags in your head now, like, hang on, I'm not taking HRT, I'm not doing any exercise. I might need to have to think about lifting my body mass or strengthening my bones. Common fracture sites: wrist, shoulder, yeah, and spine. Because if you fall, you put your arm out. But and they think like nearly 50% of all women over the age of 60 will have at least one spinal fracture. But if you break particular parts of your body, okay, in particular your hip, then it's in big, big trouble. Okay, so how do you know if you've got the start of osteoporosis? So one of the things you might notice is that you've lost height. Okay, if you speak to any old person, they go, yeah, it used to be this, but now I'm smaller. And that's because the spine has broken and compacted. The other thing you can have is you'll have more wrinkles around your mouth. You get that little puckered mouth because your jaw is getting smaller, and you have more gaps between your teeth. Maybe you've got wobbly teeth, or maybe even your teeth fall out, or you have a more rounded upper body. These should be like little flags to you that maybe your bone mass density needs some work on. Think about doing body mass, yeah, press ups, but maybe not sit ups. Going to the gym, lifting heavy weights. A hip fracture causes permanent disability in 50% of all cases, and is fatal in 20% of all cases of hip fracture in the UK. And this is because they don't think breaking your hip kills you, but being inactive after breaking your hip then causes other problems, such as blood clot to the heart, you have a heart attack, you have a stroke, whatever, or you have pneumonia. And they think now it's your fitness entering that menopausal phase that influences how long and happy you live. So you could live a long time, but be crippled with arthritis or crippled with osteoporosis or nervous. But you want to live and enjoy your life. So try and store up as much health in your body before we start to go through this diminishing phase. And don't panic. Don't think like, oh, it's too late now, because you can slow it down. Okay? You can't stop it, but you can slow down the progress, so you can become younger than your actual age by slowing it down a little bit. When we look at the vertebral spinal fractures, in about 60 to 70%, they are silent and people don't even know they've happened. They come to me with back pain. I have to think about, have they gone through the menopause? How old are they? You know, what is going on here? There's a report out by NICE in 2021, so it's not that old, that 10% of women over the age of 55 who go into hospital with a fracture die when they're an inpatient. I mean, they haven't even left the hospital and they die because of the trauma. You know, I think that bone health for me, it has to be a little bit more critical in how we get outside, get vitamin D, eat healthily so that we have calcium on a daily basis. Remember, we can't store that, we want to have the turnover of calcium. Are you eating enough food? You know, are you eating enough food that has sufficient amount of calcium? And then I think that together we can kind of go like, oh, I'm going through this terrible phase of menopause. Exercise will ease it because it stimulates the brain function to work better. And that is why it's key to keep active and keep exercising. But nutrition is your friend. There are some foods called isoflavones or phytoestrogens, plants with estrogen in them. If you've seen any of kind of these shakes or drinks, they're quite often plant-based estrogen foods. So things like soy and flaxseed and nuts and guess what, green vegetables. You know, we keep coming back to these. So if you have a diet that you eat estrogen on a daily basis, it's plant-based estrogen. Don't think your HRT is human-based estrogen, because it's not. Quite often the hormone levels that they give you in HRT is plant-based estrogen anyway. So have a look at ways you can incorporate that into your diet every single mealtime so that you're keeping your skin healthy, your hair healthy, you're keeping your insides healthy. And the more I read about the positive things that we can do to help, the more I think I wish I'd known this, because I felt so hopeless that it was like overwhelming me and I didn't know what to do. I was thinking like, I can't be this person. I grieved the loss of who I was and I couldn't work out what was happening. And I'm hoping that all of my kind of frustration with that time has meant now that this course that I put together is going to change fitness instructors who will then go out there and look at women in their 40s and go like, don't come with me with your 1k dumbbells because your handbag probably weighs more than that. Let's go and do some weight training. You know, you have to be careful, as with anything. And you know, there's lots of things, but more people, let's have a look at osteoporosis. More people die of osteoporosis than breast cancer, cardiovascular disease, and type 2 diabetes put together. And yet, we don't treat weight training in schools to kids. We should be doing these things. You can be that generation. You need to think about ways, how can I improve my strength? Simple things. Carry your shopping. Park away from, don't put all your shopping in the trolley. Put the trolley next to the supermarket. Carry it. Carry your suitcases. Do exercise to strengthen your grip. Ease your joints. Eat anti-inflammatory foods. Exercise regularly. You don't have to join a gym. You can do online exercises. There's thousands of them on YouTube. Make sure you check if you're worried about your back or you're worried about osteoporosis, check that first. Go for walks. Get yourself a set of dumbbells. Okay, Christmas is coming. They're not cheap dumbbells. Get yourself a set of dumbbells. Get yourself a set of weights. Even if you're only doing 10 minutes every other day, is better than doing nothing and waiting for that time to come. So the next steps for you are to think about, what do I want to do? How do I see my life ahead? How do I incorporate some rest and recovery for my brain alongside eating well and including estrogen-based foods to up my estrogen level, protect my bones, and what kind of exercise can I do? We've seen loads of people with comments on here. I don't know, Andrea, if it's okay with fibros. I'll come and read the comments, okay? But please feel free to message me. And if you are interested, then, you know, keep in touch. I am looking to do what I call Menopause Boost, which is going to be an online course that you can follow in your own time. I have done a couple of menopause cafes where we've done the exercises live together. I think sometimes when you're going through hot flushes and things like that, you know, some days you don't feel up to it. And so I've set it up to be a programme, and that will be out at the beginning of November. But no pressure, you don't have to. There's plenty of other things. I don't want it to be a sell. I want to feel like I'm empowering you in a positive way to look at the science part of how exercise and nutrition help you through the menopause for the rest of your life. Take care, everybody. Hwyl fawr. I hope you enjoyed the chat, and I'll come and read your comments. I'll comment on you later. Right, I've got to switch this off. I hate this thing now because it kind of takes 3 seconds. So any comments, please post away. See, it doesn't go.